In less than 3 minutes, a judge will speak 12 words that are meant to erase a man's life. The courtroom is packed. Outside, police dogs strain against their leashes. Inside, Govan Mbeki sits almost motionless in the dock, flanked by other accused men. He is 54. His hands are clasped, his glasses resting low on his nose. On the table in front of him lies a notebook filled with tiny, disciplined handwriting. Ideas the government calls terrorism, but which he calls South Africa's future. Across the room, his invisible competitor stands tall and confident. It isn't just the prosecutor. It isn't just the white policeman who carried files thicker than bricks into this hall. Govan's real rival is bigger, colder, more patient. A system of apartheid that has been training for this moment for decades, rehearsing the art of breaking men like him. For years, they have raced each other. Govan trying to organize faster than the regime can repress, the regime trying to shut him down before his ideas take root. Now, in this room, it looks as if apartheid is about to win. But to understand how a quiet boy from a remote village ends up in a courtroom facing life in prison, competing with one of the most brutal systems of the 20th century, we have to wind the clock back before the barbed wire, before the courtroom, before the name Mbeki would be whispered with both respect and fear, back to a child born into a country that did not want him to exist as a full human being. Govan Archibald Mbeki enters the world on 9th July 1910 in the rolling hills near Nkamakwe, in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. It is a place of astonishing beauty. Green slopes stitched with footpaths, small streams flashing in the sun, rondavel huts clustered like beads on a hillside. Cattle bells ring softly in the distance. At first glance, it looks peaceful, timeless. But by the time Govan is old enough to walk, that landscape is already under siege. 3 years after his birth, in 1913, the Land Act will wrench away the land of millions of black South Africans, legally confining the vast majority of the population to a tiny fraction of the country's territory. Families across the Eastern Cape will see their grazing land vanish on paper, their rights turned into trespassing overnight. Govan grows up not as a passive spectator to this process, but as its child. He watches the grown-ups talk in urgent whispers. He sees neighbors forced off their fields by new landlords who show up armed with documents and rifles. He hears the bitter jokes that a black man may be good enough to fight in Europe's wars, but not good enough to own the soil his ancestors are buried in. Even as a small boy, he understands that something about this world is deeply crooked. In the evenings, by the firelight, he listens as elders tell stories of resistance, of chiefs who defied colonial wars, of prophets who predicted change. These stories are more than entertainment. They are his first political education. The heroes are not kings in far-off lands, but people who look like his neighbors, speak his language, and bleed on his soil. In the small mission school he attends, another world opens. The classroom smells of chalk and dust. On one side of the blackboard, Bible verses. On the other side, arithmetic and maps of the British Empire. Govan sits in the middle row, thin and intense, eyes narrowed behind cheap spectacles. He is not the loudest boy, not the tallest, not the most charming, but he is hungry. Across the aisle sits another boy, just as bright, just as ambitious, but lighter-skinned, from a family with slightly more means. Their competition is silent, but fierce. Who will answer the teacher's questions first? Who will memorize the English kings in the right order? Who will write the neatest essays? Every test, every exam score becomes a small contest between them. The teacher praises the other boy's handwriting, then Govan's grasp of history. They push each other higher, but the rules of the larger game are brutally unequal. The other boy can dream, realistically, of better jobs, bigger doors opening. Govan learns early that even if he wins every classroom competition, he will still lose to the color of his skin in the outside world. That unfairness burns into him like a slow, enduring fire. Education becomes his weapon. He devours books, not just the assigned texts, but whatever he can get his hands on. Pamphlets, newspapers, old magazines. He studies not only what the empire wants him to know, but also what it wants him to forget. The suppressed histories of African resistance, the economics of who owns what and why. As a teenager, he moves through the network of mission schools that produce so many African leaders of his generation. Ultimately, he reaches the University of Fort Hare, a small campus perched on a hill, surrounded by farms, but intellectually explosive. Here, in lecture halls and crowded dormitories, Govan meets young men and women from across southern Africa, future presidents, ministers, campaigners, and rebels. Fort Hare is a pressure cooker of ambition and anger, of Christian ethics and radical politics. In the chapel, they sing hymns. In the corridors, they argue about Marx, nationalism, and the best way to dismantle an empire. If the Eastern Cape Hills gave Govan his first sense of injustice, Fort Hare gives him a language for it. He studies, quietly, methodically, not the fiery orator many think of when they imagine revolutionaries, but the strategist who stays up late taking notes. He is drawn to economics, how wealth is created, and more importantly, how it is hoarded. He begins to see the pattern: land dispossession, cheap black labor, the mines, the farms, the laws. It all fits together into a machine designed to feed profit to one side and poverty to the other. Outside the campus gates, reality is even harsher. On holidays, he returns to rural communities where poverty grips like a hand around the throat. He sees families with 15 people cramped into a single, crumbling hut. He watches children walk barefoot for miles to school, only to be told that education will not change their place. He meets farm workers whipped for minor offenses, shack dwellers threatened with eviction for missing a payment that was impossible to make on their wages. The statistics that historians will later recite, how many people dispossessed, how many farms seized, are, for Govan, faces and names. One day, he stands watching as a wagon creaks down the dirt road, piled high with furniture and tools. An elderly man walks behind it, hat in hand, staring at the home he's being forced to leave. A young white official sits upright on his horse, reading from a document in a clipped, bored voice. To the official, it is just another eviction. To Govan, it is a man's entire life being pushed off a piece of earth, and it is legal. That is the moment the competition becomes clear in his mind. On one side, men like the official on the horse, backed by laws, guns, money, and the arrogance of power. On the other, men like the one trudging behind the wagon, backed only by memory and desperation. Somewhere between them stands Govan Mbeki, educated enough to understand both the law and its cruelty, angry enough to want to overturn it, calm enough to know it will require more than rage. He finishes his studies and becomes a teacher himself, then a journalist. In both roles, he refuses to remain neutral. In the classroom, he is strict but fair, pushing his students hard. He tells them, without illusion, that the world outside does not want them to succeed, but that is precisely why they must. He introduces them to ideas that go far beyond the official curriculum. African history before colonization, movements of workers. In Europe and America, the possibilities of collective action. In the newsroom, he sharpens his pen into a weapon. He writes for progressive papers, including New Age and other publications willing to publish what the mainstream press will not. Stories of past law raids, of cramped hostels built for migrant workers, of families broken by arrests under new security laws. He exposes the hypocrisy of a government that calls itself Christian while building an economy on racial slavery. Every article he publishes is a small act of defiance and a direct challenge to his emerging rival, the apartheid state's machinery of propaganda. The people on the other side of this struggle are no longer faceless. There is the local magistrate who sneers as he sentences black activists to months in jail for minor infractions. There is the security branch officer watching from the back of community meetings, making notes. There are editors who refuse his pieces, saying they are too political or too provocative, even as they calmly report on white politicians' debates about how best to tighten racial control. Govan watches these men closely. He learns their rhythms, their tactics, their language. The competition is uneven, but it is real. Who can reach the people first? The activist with a pamphlet, or the state with a new law? The journalist with a story, or the policeman with a warning? The stakes are not academic. They are measured in arrests and broken families. By the 1940s, Govan Mbeki is no longer just a provincial voice. He is becoming a force in the Eastern Cape, involved in both the African National Congress and the Communist Party. This dual commitment gives him a unique perspective. The ANC's emphasis on national liberation and the Communist Party's focus on class and economic justice fuse in his mind into a single cause. He spends days in small villages, listening more than he talks. He sits on mats in crowded huts, notebook balanced on his knee, recording how much land people have lost, what wages they earn, how many cattle they used to own, and how many they have now. From these conversations will eventually come one of his most important works, South Africa, The Peasants' Revolt, a devastating study of rural exploitation. But at the time, it is more than research. It is reconnaissance in a long war. The state is watching him as he studies it. Files with his name on them grow thicker each year. His articles are clipped and stored in folders stamped subversive. Police informers sneak into meetings where he speaks, reporting on his calm, reasoned voice as if it were a weapon. The competition intensifies. In 1952, the ANC launches the Defiance Campaign, a mass movement of civil disobedience against unjust laws. Volunteers deliberately break segregation rules, entering whites-only areas, refusing to carry passbooks, courting arrest to flood the prisons and expose the system's immorality. It is a high-stakes gamble with no guarantee of success. For Govan Mbeki, this is the moment where all his careful study, all his years of observation, must be turned into action. He helps organize in the Eastern Cape, persuading ordinary people to risk everything for a cause whose victory they may not live to see. He stands at the front of marches, not as a fiery demagogue, but as a steady presence, the man who keeps the crowd focused when fear begins to creep in. He understands that courage is contagious, and so is panic. The regime responds with its familiar arsenal: arrests, bans, violence. Yet something has shifted. For the first time, on a large scale, the state feels itself being challenged by a disciplined, organized opposition that is not afraid of its jails. Inside police stations and government offices, a different kind of race begins. Officials scramble to update laws, to create new offenses, to expand the powers of the security police. They are trying to move faster than the movement, to out-legislate and out-intimidate this rising wave of resistance. Every time activists find a new tactic, the state counters with new repression. To Govan, it feels like playing chess against an opponent who keeps adding new rules. He responds the only way he knows how, with more organization, more education, more clarity. He explains to communities that each arrest is not just a loss, but proof that the regime is afraid. He emphasizes discipline, no random violence, no aimless anger. If they are to compete seriously with a state that has all the guns, they must be smarter, more united, more patient. But time is narrowing. By the late 1950s, the atmosphere is tightening, like a noose. The government bans more organizations, silences more newspapers, lengthens sentences. The massacre at Sharpeville in 1960, when police opened fire on a peaceful protest against past laws, killing 69 people, confirms what many activists, including Govan, have already sensed. The regime is willing to commit any level of brutality to maintain control. As blood soaks into the dust at Sharpeville, a chilling understanding spreads through the movement. The old tactics, the petitions, and polite deputations are no longer enough. The race against the state has entered a new phase. Now, the question is no longer just who can persuade more people, but who can endure more pain, who can absorb more losses without breaking. Govan Mbeki, now firmly in middle age, faces a personal deadline he never chose. The regime is closing in on him and his comrades. Banning orders restrict where he can go and who he can meet. He is watched, followed, his home raided. Each day of freedom feels borrowed, like a page torn from a calendar that could be snatched away at any moment. He knows that every speech he gives, every meeting he attends, could be his last as a free man. Within the ANC, new debates erupt about strategy. Some want to continue purely non-violent resistance. Others argue that faced with massacre, they have no choice but to consider sabotage, to strike at symbols of apartheid power. It is not an easy shift. There is no guarantee it will work. It could provoke even harsher repression, even longer sentences. Here, the rivalry inside the movement itself becomes sharper. There are younger men, more charismatic, more naturally suited to public leadership, making the case for new methods. There are older leaders, cautious, worried about the consequences. Govan is not the loudest voice in these arguments, but he is one of the most respected. He brings to the table not only passion, but the cold, clear data of a man who has spent decades studying the mechanics of oppression. The clock is ticking, not just on his personal freedom, but on a historic decision. How far are they willing to go? And how fast must they move before the state preempts them? Outside, in offices he will never see, police and intelligence officials are asking their own questions. Who is orchestrating this resistance? How are these people able to move supporters, print leaflets, smuggle information under such pressure? Names are put on lists. Telephones are tapped. Safe houses are marked for eventual raids. The race is now measured in days, in hours, in whispered messages sent before a meeting is broken up. Somewhere, Govan Mbeki sits at a small table under a weak lamp, pen in hand, drawing up plans, analyzing rural conditions, thinking 3 moves ahead. Somewhere else, a security branch officer studies a map of the same region, marking the places where he suspects subversive activity. They do not meet yet, these 2 men, but their lives are already locked in a deadly contest. And all the while, the child from the Eastern Cape, who once competed over exam scores, now competes over something far greater: whether his people will ever stand upright in their own country. His time as a free man is running out. The state is about to make its most decisive move. The courtroom where we first saw him, waiting for a life sentence, is still in the future, but already in the shadows of the early 1960s, its outline is forming. The man who will sit there, calm in the face of a verdict designed to crush him, is being forged right now. In the villages he organizes, in the articles he writes, in the decisions he helps shape, as South Africa slides toward a choice between submission and confrontation. On the night he finally agrees to break the law, Govan Mbeki is at his calmest. The country around him is on edge. Past raids, funerals, whispers of massacre. Johannesburg hums with fear like an overloaded wire. But in a quiet house where a handful of men sit around a table, Govan's heartbeat is steady. He has spent his whole life trying to change South Africa with petitions, campaigns, and carefully reasoned arguments. Tonight, he accepts that words alone will not be enough. Across an invisible line, his old rival is already celebrating. The apartheid state has just shown at Sharpeville what it is prepared to do. 70 bullets into the backs of fleeing people, bodies stacked on the dust, men and women shot while running. The photographs circle the world. The government reads the outrage like a weather report and responds not with shame, but with calculation. States of emergency, mass arrests. The African National Congress outlawed, leaders banned, silenced, buried under new decrees. For the regime, it is a race they believe they are winning. They have turned peaceful protest into a crime. They have turned being black and organized into terrorism. They are tightening the net, confident that anyone who survives will either flee or break. Govan refuses to do either. In meeting after meeting, he listens as the younger leaders argue. Non-violence is being answered with bullets. Peaceful processions are being met with open fire. If they do nothing, they will be slaughtered in slow motion. If they respond with sabotage, carefully chosen targets, no loss of life, they might shake the regime, force the world to see what is happening in this corner of Africa. He knows the cost. Armed struggle is not a slogan. It is a door that once opened may never quite close again. But he also knows the cost of doing nothing. He has walked behind too many wagons loaded with the possessions of evicted families, watched too many prison vans drive away, with men whose only crime was refusing to bow. So, at that quiet table, he gives his assent. Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, is born. Among its leaders will be Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Joe Slovo, and Govan Mbeki. The state sees in this a criminal conspiracy. Govan sees something else, a last attempt to balance a brutally unequal contest. The race now accelerates. On one side, the security police expand like a dark stain. New surveillance units, more informers, wider powers. On the other, small cells form in townships and rural areas, linked by couriers who memorize addresses instead of writing them down. Using code words instead of names, safe houses are found, farm sheds prepared, printing presses moved in the dead of night. Govan's role is not to plant bombs or light fuses. He is older now, in his 50s, his hair receding, his face lined by years of strain and concentration. His weapon is strategy. He works on the political and military documents that will guide the movement. What to target, what never to touch, how to ensure that every act of sabotage is a message, not a massacre. He brings to the underground his two great strengths, patience and clarity. He insists on one principle. Life is precious. Power stations, railway lines, telephone exchanges, these can be struck. Human beings, even the enemy, must not be deliberately harmed. The aim is to unmask apartheid, not to become its mirror image. It is a fragile line to walk in a country soaked with blood. The state, of course, does not care about this distinction. In its files, every leaflet, every act of sabotage, every clandestine meeting merges into one word: terrorism. Somewhere in Pretoria, a young security branch officer studies Govan Mbeki's name in a file. He has never met the man. He knows him only through reports. Inciter, agitator, communist. He underlines the name, circles it. In his mind, Govan becomes a symbol of everything that must be crushed. The officer works late into the night, following threads of information. An unfamiliar car in a township, a stranger staying too long. In a village, a printing press rumored to be hidden in a back room. The competition between them is invisible, intimate, and lethal. Who can move faster? the aging intellectual building an underground network with notebooks and meetings, or the young officer with informers, wiretaps, and the law behind him. Who can read the country better? The man walking dusty footpaths to talk to peasants about their lives, or the one tracing routes on maps pinned to an office wall? Govan feels the pressure of time like a hand on his shoulder. New laws allow the police to hold detainees for 90 days without trial, renewable again and again. 90 days in solitary. 90 days without seeing a lawyer or family. 90 days in which anything can happen inside a cell, and nothing will ever be written down. Rumors seep through the townships, of men who emerge broken, of women who do not emerge at all. He knows they are coming for him. The question is not if, but when. Each day of freedom becomes a countdown. Each meeting might be the last one he attends before disappearing into a van at dawn. The movement has to squeeze 20 years of work into months. Training camps must be prepared, alliances strengthened, lines of communication tested, all under the gaze of a state that is learning, adapting, becoming more ruthless. Umkhonto begins its campaign. In the dead of night, explosions rock electricity pylons, ripping open the silence. No one dies by design. Railway lines are sabotaged, causing delays and damage, but no casualties. Officers linked to apartheid administration find their windows shattered, their walls blackened. The message is clear. We are here. We can strike. This land is not entirely yours. For ordinary South Africans locked in the machinery of apartheid, these reports sound like distant thunder. For the government, they sound like a starting pistol. Suddenly, Govan's rival, the state, leans forward in the race. Special units are formed to hunt the terrorists. Suspected activists are picked up, interrogated, offered a choice between terror and betrayal. Some break, some do not. A small detail slips in an interview. A name is mentioned once too often. A car is spotted twice in the wrong place. In a safe farmhouse at Rivonia, north of Johannesburg, the leadership thinks it has created a pocket of safety. Here, on a patch of land, with a thatched cottage and outbuildings, they hold meetings, draft documents, plan campaigns. They call it Lily's Farm. The files they keep there are meticulous. Minutes of meetings, propaganda drafts, strategic blueprints, including one dreaded by the state, Operation Mayibuye, a plan for possible large-scale armed struggle if peaceful change proves impossible. The farm feels like a haven. It is, in fact, a trap. Because on the other side of the city, in an office filled with smoke and paper, someone has finally connected enough dots. A police informer, a car followed, a chance observation. Slowly, the security branch officer who has been tracing Govan's name through reports begins to trace a line to this farm. He now has his own deadline. Under pressure from his superiors, he is given a clear order. Break this underground leadership before it can escalate its campaign. He knows that politicians in parliament are demanding results, that his failure will mean humiliation and his success will mean promotion. He draws a circle around the Riversdale district on a map and writes a date in the margin. Within weeks, he promises, there will be arrests. Govan continues his work, unaware that the countdown on the other side of the line is almost complete. He moves between the Eastern Cape and Johannesburg under increasing restrictions, already under banning orders that limit his movements and forbid him from attending public gatherings. He has learned to live like a shadow, slipping in and out of meetings, memorizing details instead of writing them down. Yet he still believes they have time, months, perhaps years, to refine their strategies, to build the kind of organization that can outlast any wave of repression. He is wrong. On a cold winter afternoon in July 1963, police vehicles roll quietly toward Lily's Farm. Inside the house, men sit around a table laden with papers. They are relaxed, even as the country tightens around them. Some joke, others argue about points in documents. Govan is there, the elder among them. His notebook open, his handwriting neat as ever. They are discussing the future. How many cadres can be trained, where to focus the next phase of action, how to keep the balance between symbolic sabotage and the risk of escalation. Then suddenly, the roar of engines, doors slamming, boots pounding the ground. Police! Nobody move! For a second, no one understands. The farmhouse walls, which had seemed so solid, are revealed as thin, fragile barriers. Armed policemen pour into the house and yard. Files are grabbed, weapons drawn. Some of the leaders try to escape through windows or doors. They are seized, pushed to the ground, handcuffed. The state's young officer steps into the room and sees what he has been hunting for months. Here are the documents. Here are the names. Here is Govan Mbeki, the man whose file he has read so many times, now sitting in front of him, not as ink on paper, but as a tired, calm human being, his glasses slightly askew, his hands already being bound. The race for the moment seems over. The state has won this round with brutal efficiency. But even in that moment of triumph, something unexpected happens. As the police ransack the house, hauling away boxes of documents, someone notices Govan watching them with a strange expression. Not fear, not even anger, but an intense, measuring gaze. He is already thinking several moves ahead. What these documents will reveal, what they will fail to show, how the movement outside will adapt once its core leadership has been removed. He knows what the regime does not yet realize, that arresting leaders can sometimes make them more powerful, turning living men into symbols that cannot easily be silenced. For now, though, the concrete reality is harsh. He is taken into detention under the 90-day law. The clock in his life resets, no longer counting the days of freedom, but the days in an airless cell. The interrogations begin. Long hours under bright lights, the same questions repeated, threats implied and explicit. The regime is not interested in his ideas. It is interested in information. Who else? Where else? How far does the network reach? Govan refuses to break. He uses the one weapon still in his control: silence. Or, when he must speak, evasiveness, answers that give nothing away. The competition now is not for cities or laws, but for his mind. The state tries to crack it. He tries to keep it intact. Every day he does not betray anyone feels like a small, bitter victory. Every day he remains alive is a reminder to his captors that he is not as weak as they would like to believe. But the 90 days become a conveyor belt. Detention, release, rearrest. One law replaced by another, more severe. Eventually, the state decides that secret cells and rotating detention are no longer enough. It has in its hands the Rivonia cache of documents, including Operation Mayibuyi. It has a list of names. It has a story it wants to tell, not just to South Africa, but to the world, that it is under siege by a conspiracy of terrorists, that it is justified in doing whatever it takes. They decide to stage a trial, not a routine hearing, but a spectacle. The Rivonia trial. The accused will include Nelson Mandela, already in prison for earlier offenses, now brought into this new case. Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, Andrew Malangeni, Elias Motsoaledi, Dennis Goldberg, Raymond Maleba, and Govan Mbeki. The world will be invited to watch as the state attempts to legally bury the people it sees as the brains of the revolution. Behind the scenes, prosecutors and security officers work to assemble their case. They pore over the documents seized at Lily's Leaf, desperate to find signatures, annotations, anything that can be traced to individual men. They match handwriting samples, cross-reference notes. For them, time is again a weapon. The sooner they can assemble an airtight case, the sooner they can deliver their prize. Life sentences, perhaps even death sentences, for the ringleaders. Govan, in his cell, senses the shifting mood. The interrogations change tone. The talk becomes less about informers and more about guilt. Lawyers begin to appear. He realizes that the competition has moved to a new arena, the courtroom. The state will try to present him as a criminal mastermind. He and his comrades must present themselves as what they truly are: political leaders, representatives of a people driven to extremes by centuries of injustice. The stakes are simple and brutal: life or death. And beyond that, the story that will be told about them for generations. There is another, more intimate race running underneath this. Govan is a father. His son, Thabo, has already left the country to join the struggle in exile. The regime would love to use that fact as a weapon, to twist blood into leverage. Govan knows that any sign of weakness from him in court could echo in the ears of his children, convincing them that the price of resistance is too high. He also knows that if he dies, he will never see them again. The ticking of this personal clock is quieter than the public drama, but it is just as real. The trial begins. The courtroom fills with journalists, diplomats, policemen. The accused stand in the dock, their faces familiar now in grainy black and white photographs. Mandela uses the platform to deliver a speech that will echo around the globe. Govan stands beside him, listening, knowing that every word is another blow struck in that long, uneven contest with the regime. When his own turn comes, he is measured, controlled, refusing to apologize. He explains, in the cool, precise language of a man who has spent his life studying injustice, why the movement chose the path it did, how the state's violence paved the way for sabotage. He is not performing for the judge. He is speaking to history. Yet he knows that in the immediate sense, the judge is all that stands between him and the gallows. The prosecution lays out its case. Documents, statements, diagrams. Govan watches the state try to weave a narrative out of seized papers, some annotated by him, some not. It is a strange experience, seeing years of clandestine thought flattened into exhibits, their context stripped away. The rival he has fought for decades now grips the microphone, telling the story its way, pointing to his name as proof of its own righteousness. He understands something crucial then. Even here, even now, it is still a race between their version of events and his. The judge will choose one. The audience outside South Africa may choose another. The underground movement, scattered but alive, will listen for signals in how he and his comrades behave under pressure. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months. The tension rises like a tide. There are rumors that the death penalty is on the table, that the regime wants to hang them as a warning. In the dock, they maintain a quiet dignity, trading small jokes, offering each other strength in glances and murmured words. At night, in their cells, they lie awake, counting the days they might have left. Each morning, they wake up surprised to find that for now, they are still alive. Finally, the trial grinds to its conclusion. Closing arguments are made. The judge retires to consider his verdict. Outside, the world holds its breath. In London, in New York, in Dar es Salaam, people march and petition, demanding that the Rivonia accused not be executed. Inside South Africa, the police dogs are ready, the prisons prepared. The regime has set the stage for a decisive blow. It does not want to appear weak, and so we return, almost, to where we began. The courtroom is packed. The judge is about to speak. Govan Mbeki stands in the dock, his face composed, his hands steady. He has spent his life racing an inhuman system that has more guns, more laws, more time. Now, in the few seconds before the judge opens his mouth, all those years compress into a single question. Will they be allowed to live long enough to see whether their struggle was worth it? His rival, the apartheid state, believes it has finally cornered him. But even as the clock counts down to the 12 words that will decide his fate, Govan understands one more twist in this ruthless competition. Sometimes being buried is how seeds are planted. The judge does not kill him. He does something colder. He sentences Govan Mbeki to life, then hands him over to a system designed to make that life as small, invisible, and hopeless as possible. No gallows, no dramatic final speech, just the slow, grinding promise of decades behind bars on an island most South Africans will never see. The words land like stones. Life imprisonment. In the dock, there is a flicker, relief that they will not be hanged, swallowed almost immediately by the weight of what life means. For the regime, it is a perfect compromise. They avoid the international fury that would follow executions, yet still remove these men from history. For Govan, it feels like being buried alive. He does not flinch. The guards move in. Chains clink. The courtroom empties. Outside, the crowd surges, trying to catch a last glimpse. Behind the closed doors of a prison van, Govan sits with his comrades. His wrists raw from the handcuffs, his mind counting in a new way. Not days to the verdict anymore, but years to what? Freedom? Death? He cannot see that far ahead. All he knows is that the race has changed lanes. The apartheid state has won this round in court. Now it plans to win the war by grinding its enemies down in silence. The van drives through the night. Eventually, there is a harbor. The smell of salt, the clatter of chains against metal. They are herded onto a boat. Wind slaps at their faces. A grey shape grows on the horizon. A slab of rock in a cold sea. A piece of land stripped bare by history and turned into an instrument of fear. Robben Island. The guards talk loudly, as if rehearsed, about terrorists and traitors, about old men who will leave here in wooden boxes. One of them, an officer with tired eyes and a clipped voice, carries a familiar file under his arm. A Rivonia file, thick and creased at the corners. Somewhere inside, Govan knows, his name is underlined again and again in blue pencil. The rivalry has followed him across the water. On land, the rules come at them like blows. No talking in certain areas. No books without permission. No letters that mention politics. Hard labor in the lime quarry, where the sun reflects off the white rock so fiercely that it burns their eyes. The food is bad, the blankets thin, the cells small enough that a man can touch both walls if he stretches out his arms. The message is simple. Forget that you were ever leaders. Here, you are numbers in blue overalls. The first weeks are the worst. The work in the quarry is relentless. Men swing pickaxes into the stone until their hands split and bleed. Dust chokes their lungs, settles in their hair, turns sweat into a paste that stings their skin. Guards shout and curse, looking for any sign of weakness. At night, in his narrow cell, Govan lies on a thin mat, his muscles screaming, his eyes burning from the light and the lime. He is 53 years old. He does the calculation in his head. If life means 30 years, he will be over 80 when he leaves. If he leaves, for the first time in his life, the deadline is not one he sets for himself, but one his body sets for him. How long can a man keep his mind sharp in a place designed to dull it? How long before the island does what the state could not do in court and turns him into a ghost? The officers believe time is on their side. Behind a desk on the mainland, that same security branch man who once circled Govan's name in reports reads the prison updates. Inmate Mbeki, compliant, works well, no serious infractions. Good, let them quietly age, he thinks. Let the world forget they exist. He has other files now, other activists to track, new threats to chase in the townships. The race, he believes, has moved on. He is wrong. Because inside the prison gates, something begins that the state did not plan for. At first, resistance is small, almost invisible. A whispered lesson in a cell. A smuggled scrap of newspaper hidden in a shoe. A book passed from hand to hand, its pages memorized by men who know it may be confiscated at any moment. They call Robben Island a prison. The prisoners themselves start calling it something else, half joking, half earnest, the university. In that university, Govan Mbeki becomes a central professor. He teaches economics and politics to younger prisoners, many of whom arrived with anger, but without the deep understanding of the system they are fighting. In a cramped yard, during the few precious hours of exercise, he uses pebbles and lines scratched in the dirt to explain land dispossession, migrant labor, the logic of apartheid's homelands. He turns the prison yard into a lecture hall. The guards shouted orders into background noise. His rival, the state, has locked his body away. His mind is not so easily controlled. The regulations try to shrink the prisoner's world, limiting reading to a narrow list of approved books. Govan and his comrades bend those rules, stretching them until they almost snap. Through legal requests, subtle pressure, and the occasional sympathy of a warder, political works seep in, disguised as harmless texts. A book on agriculture becomes a doorway to discussions about land reform. A history volume sparks arguments about empire and resistance. At night, in the dim light of a bare bulb, Govan reads and rereads everything he can get his hands on. He is determined that prison will not be an interruption in his life's work, but a continuation of it. Word of his earlier writing, especially The Peasants' Revolt, has already spread beyond the prison walls. Now inside, fragments of his analysis escape through letters and visits, often in coded language. The state censors letters with thick black ink, cutting out whole paragraphs, reducing sentences to skeletons. But meaning is stubborn. A single line, "The fields here are stony, but we continue to plant," carries more than the censor realizes. There is another deadline running through all of this, one that gnaws at Govan in the quiet hours. His children are growing up without him. Letters from home arrive sporadically, thin envelopes that smell faintly of dust and travel. They are already late when they come. By the time he reads that Thabo has finished school, that he has left the country, that he has joined the struggle in exile, those events are years behind him. Fatherhood becomes something measured in censored sentences and fading photographs. He imagines his son in distant cities, Lusaka, London, wherever the ANC has offices, speaking in halls and meeting rooms, using arguments that echo lessons Govan once gave at their kitchen table. On the mainland, his old pursuer notices that name again. Thabo Mbeki appears in reports as a rising figure in the ANC's external mission. The security officer, older now, his hair thinner, feels a jolt of recognition. The race he thought he had finished with the father has quietly resumed with the son. The file on Mbeki grows another layer. The state's competition with this family has become generational. On the island, the days fall into a brutal rhythm. Wake up before dawn, roll call, work in the quarry, meals swallowed under watch, letters read under the censor's shadow, sleep if the noise from the corridor allows it. But within this monotony, there are spikes of tension, moments when the struggle pierces even the thick walls of the prison. One winter, news filters in of an uprising in Soweto. It arrives in fragments, whispers from new prisoners, hints in heavily edited newspapers, students, schoolchildren, marching against being forced to learn in Afrikaans, police opening fire, bodies of teenagers on dusty streets, a generation that has grown up entirely under apartheid, deciding in a single day that they will not be silent. In the yard, Govan listens, his jaw tight. The men around him are shaken. Many have younger siblings, or even children the same age as those students. Rage churns in the air, thick and hot. Some of the younger prisoners talk about hopelessness, Others are filled with a reckless, urgent determination. Here, the rival feels closer than ever. The police that fired those shots are part of the same machine that feeds this prison. Time, once again, becomes an enemy and a weapon. The regime hopes that Govan and his comrades will die before the pressure from the streets becomes unmanageable. The liberation movement hopes they will live long enough to guide the transition that must come. Each new funeral in Soweto, each new arrest, shortens that gap. In his cell, Govan can feel the walls vibrating, not just with the wind from the sea, but with the distant rumble of a country approaching a breaking point. There are small victories. After years of struggle, hunger strikes, and petitions, the prison authorities are forced to improve conditions slightly. Better food, more access to study materials. It is not mercy, it is calculation, driven partly by international scrutiny, partly by the need to keep these high-profile prisoners alive. Yet even those concessions are a sign that the state is not as confident as it once was. It is adjusting under pressure, like a boxer who realizes the opponent is still standing after too many rounds. Govan does not mistake these changes for kindness. He measures them the way a strategist measures enemy movement, as evidence of strain. The rivalry on the island becomes more personal when a particular warder is assigned to their section. A heavy-set man with a permanent scowl and a quick temper. His job, unofficially, is clear. Break the big names. He tries humiliation, shouting arbitrary punishments. He searches cells with theatrical violence, scattering books, tearing up letters. He confiscates a notebook Govan has been using to draft ideas, keeping it as if it were a trophy. For weeks afterward, Govan feels as if a part of his mind has been ripped away. Then one day, a small twist. The notebook reappears in his cell, placed carefully under his blanket. No note, no explanation. When he opens it, he sees that some pages have been roughly thumbed, but none are missing. He never finds out which warder, which crack in the system, allowed that small act of defiance. All he knows is that even inside the enemy's ranks, time is changing people. Some of those tasked with guarding him are starting to question why this old man, this polite, calm prisoner, must be treated as if he were a monster. Years pass. The island gnaws at his health. His eyesight, already strained by the glare of the quarry, worsens. The government offers medical attention, but always with a price attached. Statements, cooperation, public condemnations of violence. Each time, Govan refuses. Each refusal tightens the time limit he lives under. What use is a strategist who cannot read? What use is a writer who cannot see the page? The cost of his integrity is counted in tiny personal losses like this. Outside, the apartheid system begins to creak. International sanctions bite deeper. The economy strains. The townships erupt again and again. The security officer, who first hunted Govan, finds his days filled with endless reports of unrest, meetings about total strategy, late-night briefings about the need to crush resistance while there is still time. He is older now, his hands a little less steady when he lights his cigarette. He looks at the photograph of Govan in an old file and feels a strange mix of triumph and unease. They locked this man away for life, he tells himself, and yet his ideas seem to be everywhere. The race has become more complex than he ever imagined. By the mid-1980s, the regime is looking for exits. Behind the walls of secure offices, some politicians and generals start talking about negotiations, not because they have changed their minds about apartheid, but because they can feel the deadline closing in. Demographics, economics, international isolation, time, which once seemed to belong to them, is now turning against them. In that shifting atmosphere, the question of the Rivonia prisoners surfaces again. What if, someone suggests, they release some of them? Not Mandela, not yet, but perhaps others, older men, those whose bodies are starting to fail. It will look like generosity, It might ease international pressure. And, another voice adds, what threat can an old man who has spent a quarter of a century on an island really pose? Govan's name is on that list. When he hears the first rumors of possible release, his reaction is not simple joy. It is a complicated knot of emotions. Hope, certainly, but also suspicion. He knows his rival too well to believe in sudden kindness. What conditions will they attach? What statements will they demand? And if he refuses those terms, as he has refused every earlier bargain, will they simply leave him here to die? One more unnoticed casualty of a war fought in slow motion? The offer, when it finally comes, is indeed wrapped in strings. A carefully worded document is placed before him. If he renounces violence, if he distances himself from the ANC and the Communist Party, if he agrees to live quietly, he can leave the island. On the surface, it is freedom. Underneath, it is a request to amputate everything he has stood for. He reads it slowly, his failing eyes tracing each line, then looks up at the official. The rival is leaning over the table, in human form again, wearing a suit instead of a uniform, speaking softly instead of barking orders. The meaning is the same. Choose safety on our terms, or stay buried. Govan does not raise his voice. He simply says, no. It is a dangerous choice for a man in his late 70s. Each year, his body weakens. Each winter, the cold grips his chest a little harder. The time limit is no longer abstract. It is in his bones, in the way he struggles to stand after a long night on a thin mattress. But he cannot bear the thought of walking out of prison as a symbol of surrender. The race he has run all his life has never been about staying alive at any cost. It has been about staying true. The state recalculates. Within the upper levels of government, the debate continues. Keeping men like Govan locked away forever no longer looks as clever as it once did. They have become martyrs, their names chanted in marches, their faces printed on posters. Instead of disappearing, they have multiplied in the imagination of those they sought to inspire. Eventually, in 1987, a decision is made. The door that was supposed to stay shut forever begins to open. On a grey day, after more than 2 decades on Robben Island, Govan Mbeki is told to pack his few belongings. He folds his clothes with deliberate care, as if each shirt, each worn book, is part of a private ritual. The other prisoners stand watching, some with smiles, some with tears held back. To see one of the Rivonia men leave alive is, in itself, a victory. On the mainland, his old pursuer reads the memo, Prisoner G. Mbeki released. He frowns. This was not how the story was supposed to end. In his mind, these men had been filed away, closed chapters. Now one of them is stepping back into the country at a moment when the whole system is under pressure. The rivalry he thought history had settled is about to resume in a new arena, one where guns and files may count less than memory and moral authority. The journey back feels unreal. Govan steps into a world transformed by technology, fashion, even language. Cars look different, buildings taller, the crowds in the streets more restless. He is greeted by comrades, family, strangers who know him only from photographs and whispered stories. The man who once walked into a courtroom expecting to be buried alive is now being carried on shoulders, his name chanted, his thin frame surrounded by a sea of uplifted hands. Yet even in that surge of welcome, he can feel how little time he has. Decades on the island have taken their toll. His back aches, his eyes fail him, his heart is no longer the reliable engine it once was. The deadline he now faces is brutally clear. There are only so many years left in which he can help shape the last, most delicate phase of the struggle, the phase where the enemy does not sit only across a courtroom or prison fence, but across a negotiating table. His rival, the apartheid state, is still powerful, still armed, still dangerous. But for the first time in his long life, Govan steps into the contest not as a hunted man in hiding, nor as a prisoner in chains, but as an elder walking into a country on the brink of transformation, with just enough time left to try to ensure that the victory he once only dreamed of does not twist into something unrecognizable. Freedom, when it finally arrives, does not feel like freedom. It feels like a new kind of sentence. He has left the island, the bars, the roll calls. But when Govan Mbeki steps back into life in South Africa, it is into a country that still belongs to his enemy. Police vans still prowl the streets. Passes and permits still rule black lives. The same old government that locked him away now dictates where he may live, whom he may see, what he may say. They call it release. On paper, he is a free man. In reality, he is delivered into what the apartheid bureaucracy calls restrictive conditions. He is ordered to live in Port Elizabeth, confined to a cramped house in a township the authorities hope will swallow him. He must report to the police station. He may not attend public gatherings. He may not address crowds. He may not leave the area without permission. The state has changed tactics, not goals. If they cannot keep him invisible on an island, they will try to make him harmless in plain sight. Inside that small house, the clock on the wall ticks more loudly than it ever did on Robben Island. Each tick is a reminder that he is 77 years old. Each day that he spends under restriction is a day he cannot spend rebuilding the movement, guiding younger comrades, shaping the future he risked everything for. For the first time, the deadline he feels is not the regime's, but his own. He sits at a table piled with letters, clippings, and thin notebooks, and does a different kind of calculation. If his health holds, perhaps he has 10-15 useful years left. 10 years to help overthrow a system that has been refining its cruelty for decades. 10 years to try to make sure whatever comes after is not a betrayal of those who died, believing it would be better. 10 years, maybe, to outrun a lifetime of damage. On the other side of town, in an office lined with steel filing cabinets, the old security officer reads the latest reports. He has followed the name Mbeki for a quarter of a century. It has been stamped on surveillance files, interrogation records, newspaper cuttings, intelligence summaries. Now, a new file lands on his desk. Mbeki, G. Conditions of release. He reads the conditions with professional satisfaction. Daily reporting, no mass meetings, no speeches, no leadership positions without permission. If this old man imagines he will step out of prison and into a hero's role, he is mistaken. The officer makes notes in the margin. Monitor visitors, limit press exposure, deny travel requests. The race, he believes, is still his to control. He has already stolen 24 years of Govan's life. He will smother whatever is left under paperwork. But paper is a poor shield against hunger. Word spreads that Govan is back. People walk for miles to his little house, ignoring the risk, filling his yard with bodies and whispers. They cannot make speeches, so they make tea. They cannot hold meetings, so they hold conversations. 1, 2, 5 people at a time. Union leaders, township activists, church workers, student organizers slip through his doorway. Sometimes late at night, when informers are less likely to notice, the living room becomes a secret council chamber. Maps and pamphlets share the table with teacups. A bare light bulb hangs above conversations that braid together Robben Island experience and township urgency. Govan listens more than he speaks, asking questions, forcing clarity. What do you want, specifically? Who is ready to strike exactly? Where are the weak points in their control? The same mind that once mapped rural resistance in the Peasants' Revolt now maps urban revolt in air thick with cigarette smoke. Outside, police cars cruise past slowly, headlights sweeping over the drawn curtains. Inside, the old man keeps one eye on the door and another on the clock. Time is doing something strange now. History that crawled for decades in the face of past laws and police raids suddenly begins to move faster. Protests swell. Trade unions grow. International sanctions bite deeper. The economy creaks. White businessmen, who once toasted the security officer at quiet dinners, start asking nervous questions about stability. There are too many strikes, too many funerals, too many foreign headlines. And then, in February 1990, the impossible happens. Govan is sitting in his small living room when the news comes. The African National Congress unbanned. Political organizations legalized. Nelson Mandela to be released. He leans forward as the television flickers to life. The apartheid president's speech is dry, careful, bureaucratic. But behind the dull phrases, the shift is seismic. For the first time, the government is not just arresting and banning. It is retreating. Every sentence that frees an organization is a sentence that shrinks the space in which the security man can work. Every repeal of a law is an admission that it cannot be enforced forever. When the camera cuts to scenes outside Victor Verster prison, Govan's throat tightens. There is Mandela, taller and greyer than when they last walked together in the prison yard. There is Winnie at his side. There are the crowds, a sea of faces, fists raised, people climbing trees, roofs, anything they can to see. A roar rolls through the room, even though Govan is alone. He can feel it vibrate in his bones. For a moment, he forgets the clock, but only for a moment. With unbanning comes another race. Now there is a rush, not only to resist, but to define what kind of country will be born from this crumbling system. What price will be paid at the negotiating table for a flag and a vote? Who will lead and on whose terms? Govan, at last, is allowed to move more freely. The restrictions ease under pressure. He travels, cautiously at first, then more widely. He speaks at meetings he once would have been arrested for attending. He finds himself standing on stages, in packed halls, in stadiums buzzing with songs, before crowds who have never seen him in person, but know his name from banned books and whispered stories. When he opens his mouth, there are no grand gestures. His voice is calm, measured, but each sentence lands with the weight of the years he spent behind bars. He talks about land, about labor, about the rural poor who do not appear in glossy political brochures. He reminds cheering audiences that freedom is not just a matter of a new flag, that the chains that bind a farm worker's wage are as real as the bars that once closed around his own wrists. He praises the courage of the youth who fought in his absence and warns gently, relentlessly against the temptation of easy victory. Not everyone likes what he says. Within the newly legal ANC, debates roar. There are leaders fresh from exile, polished by international campaigns, fluent in the language of diplomacy and development banks. There are commanders from the armed wing, used to thinking in terms of sabotage and supply lines. There are unionists whose power lies in mass strikes. There are local activists whose status was forged in street battles with police. And there is Govan, old, respected, stubborn. When he argues in internal meetings that negotiations must not abandon the poor, that land and economic power must be on the table, some nod vigorously, others roll their eyes. Times have changed, they tell him. The Cold War is ending. The world is watching. Investors are skittish. There are new words now. Globalization, market confidence, structural adjustment. He listens, then goes back to the same stubborn questions. Who will own the mines? Who will own the land? Who will control the banks? The rival he has fought all his life is shifting its shape. The apartheid state is still at the table, but now it wears a polite smile. Behind it, another force waits, an economic order that does not care about race except as a marketing category that can absorb a black minister as easily as a white, as long as the flows of profit are not disturbed. The clock keeps ticking. CODESA, the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, convenes in 1991. Negotiators gather in halls, where chandeliers glint over tired faces and stacks of documents. Behind the ANC delegation, a line of veterans sits quietly, sometimes consulted, sometimes ignored. Among them is Govan, who carries into those air-conditioned rooms the memory of cold quarry wind and rationed blankets. His son sits closer to the front. Thabo Mbeki has become one of the ANC's chief negotiators, a key strategist in the delicate dance of give and take with a regime that still has guns and laws and an economy to wield. He moves easily in this world of briefcases and handshakes, his arguments precise, his patience legendary, his pipe smoke curling. Through late-night discussions, father and son now stand on the same side of the table, but not always on the same line within the side. In private, their discussions are intense. Thabo emphasizes the international balance of forces, the need to secure a democratic opening and avoid civil war, the danger that a cornered regime will lash out. Govan agrees on the dangers, but pushes back on the compromises. He worries that the movement's moral authority, a weapon that took decades to forge, is being spent too quickly. There is warmth between them, pride, affection. There is also, quietly, an edge, a contest over how sharply to draw the line between victory and surrender. From the sidelines, the old security officer watches this with a mixture of disbelief and dread. He sees footage of CODESA on the evening news, ANC leaders walking side by side with ministers he once briefed. He recognizes faces from old surveillance photos, now wearing suits and traded slogans for legal language. And there, sometimes in the background, is Govan, a man he helped bury on an island, now consulting on the very terms under which the state will give up power. In his drawer, there is a medal the officer once received for distinguished service in the fight against terrorism. It feels heavier now, as if mocking him. He flips to the next page in his report. The name Mbeki appears twice, once in the context of negotiations, once in a section about the ANC's internal debates. The file notes ideological differences and tensions around economic policy. The officer underlines those phrases. If the state has to surrender, he thinks bitterly, perhaps the victors will at least fight among themselves. He will not be entirely wrong. The next twist is one Govan feels like a physical blow. After publicly criticizing what he sees as creeping top-down control and insufficient internal democracy, he finds himself on the receiving end of disciplinary action from the organization he has served for most of his life. The ANC, under pressure, balancing 1,000 demands, does not always respond kindly to internal critique, especially when it comes from someone whose words carry weight with the grassroots. For a period, he is suspended. The news hits the streets like a slap. Some see it as necessary discipline in a volatile time. Others see it as ingratitude of the worst kind, a movement scolding a man who spent half his life in its service. For Govan, it is painful, but not paralyzing. He has never been loyal to a logo. He has been loyal to an idea, and the idea that the poor must not be abandoned, that power must be accountable, does not depend on membership cards. The suspension will not last. The respect he commands among ordinary people and veterans alike pulls him back into the fold. But the incident leaves a mark, a reminder that the new South Africa will have its own forms of rivalry, its own temptations to silence uncomfortable voices. The clock marches toward 1994. The first democratic elections are no longer a distant dream, but dates printed on posters, schedules pinned to office walls, rallies timed down to the minute. Every day is double-loaded. There is the urgent practical work of campaigning, and there is the heavy symbolic work of centuries ending. Govan, despite his age and failing eyesight, throws himself into the campaign. He travels to rural Eastern Cape villages where the roads are still dust and the houses still lean. He sits on church benches, in community halls, under trees, explaining ballot papers to people whose lives have never before mattered at a polling station. He warns them that a vote is powerful, but not magic. He tells them that a government can be friendly or hostile, black or white, but the land they work and the wages they earn will always be the true test of freedom. When election day comes, he stands in line like everyone else. The queue snakes around the block, full of people in their Sunday best. Many of them old enough to remember when even standing in such a line would have earned them a beating. Some recognize him, whispering, pointing. A woman in a faded dress insists he take her place in front of her. He refuses gently. For an hour or two, he is just one South African among millions, fingers stained with the same ink, heart pounding with the same mix of disbelief and joy. Later, when the results come in and the ANC wins, his name appears again, not in a security file, not on a wanted list, but on a parliamentary roll. He is elected to the new Senate. In a twist that would have been unthinkable to the younger man forcing his way into whites-only libraries, Govan Mbeki walks into a chamber of government not as the accused, not as the prisoner, but as the legislator. He becomes deputy president of the Senate, sitting in a high-backed chair, gavel in hand, guiding debates in a building that once echoed with laws designed to crush people like him. The contrast is almost too sharp to process. On television, the old security officer sees him for the first time in a suit that fits the formal stage rather than the courtroom dock. He nearly drops his glass. The man he once helped deliver to an island is now co-presiding over a democratic institution built on a constitution the officer never wanted, signed by a government he no longer recognizes. In conversations at his local bar, the officer grumbles about sellouts and terrorists in suits, but the bitterness cannot hide. The truth, the race he thought he had won, has flipped. The man he tried to erase is helping design the rules by which his children and grandchildren will live. Inside the Senate, Govan carries two roles. Publicly, he is a calm chairperson, ensuring that rules are followed, that speeches are timed, that the new machinery of democracy works. Privately, he is an unrelenting conscience. He corners ministers in corridors to question policies. He pushes for attention to the rural poor, to land reform, to housing. He is polite, but persistent. The old cadence of underground meetings now echoing in formal committee rooms. His rival has changed shape again. Apartheid as a legal system is dying, but inequality is not. It has slipped into new clothes, contracts, board appointments, development plans that promise much and deliver slowly. New elites emerge, some of them former comrades, now chauffeured past the same shacks they once organized in. Corruption whispers at the edges of government buildings. In late-night conversations, Govan's voice is full of both pride and worry. Pride that a black government exists at all, that laws once written to humiliate his people are gone. Worry that the momentum of struggle will drain away into comfort, that the new rulers will forget the graves behind them. He knows he will not be there to watch for long. By the late 1990s, his health is failing more visibly. The years of prison, poor diet, hard labor, stress, and age combine into a weariness that sleep cannot cure. His eyesight, damaged by the glare of the lime quarry, continues to fade. Reading, which once fueled his mind like oxygen, becomes laborious. He relies more on spoken briefings, on visitors' summaries of thick policy documents and legal texts. He steps down from parliamentary office after serving his term. Others might see retirement as rest. For him, it is a reduction in formal power and a sharpening of the race against time. He withdraws from daily politics, but not from politics itself. The living room, the garden, His modest home becomes stages. Journalists, students, activists, and even government officials come to sit at his table to hear what the old man thinks. Sometimes one of those officials is his son. By now, Thabo Mbeki has become deputy president, then president of South Africa. The boy whose letters once reached Robben Island late and censored now travels the world in presidential jets, speaking in parliaments and summits. He carries his own pressures, his own deadlines, AIDS, unemployment, crime, the expectations of a nation that wants miracles in one generation. In private moments, the roles blur. The president visits his father, sits at the same worn table where Govan once taught his children the logic of exploitation with pebbles and pencils. They talk of policy and principle, of compromise and courage. They argue sometimes, softly but firmly, about priorities, about the pace of change, about global forces that Thabo sees more clearly. Now, from the heights of state power, there is love in those conversations. There is also the faint outline of another competition, not for office, but for the meaning of the struggle itself. What did they fight for? What counts as betrayal? What counts as victory? In those last years, the most relentless rival Govan faces is not the state, not his party, not even global capital. It is time. His body slows. Public appearances become rare. When he does speak, each word is weighed, not only by the audience, but by his own sense of what is worth the effort to say. He knows that at some point, sooner rather than later, he will leave a battlefield still in motion. He spends more time in the Eastern Cape, close to the rural landscapes that first shaped his politics. He visits villages where children now learn under the South African flag he never saw as a child. Some know his name from school books. Others only know him as the old man the teachers speak of with unusual respect. He moves slowly, but his mind, when engaged, still locks onto issues with the old clarity. He worries about land, about the slow pace of redistribution, about the desperation etched into the faces of young men without work. He worries about a new kind of exile, young professionals leaving for opportunities overseas, taking skills the country needs with them. He worries about an epidemic spreading through townships and villages alike, one he does not fully understand, but knows is devastating. AIDS. The weight of all this could crush a weaker man. For Govan, it settles into a kind of rough acceptance. He understands now that the race he has been running all his life has no finish line, only handovers. He has done what he could. In classrooms, in underground cells, in courts, in quarries, in parliament, at kitchen tables. Others will carry the baton, some will stumble, some will sprint, some will drop it altogether. But the track will still be there. On 30th August 2001, the clock stops. Govan Mbeki dies in Port Elizabeth, aged 91. News spreads quickly. Radios interrupt programming. Parliament stands in silence. Statements pour in from veterans, from unions, from political parties, from foreign capitals. Many use the same words: giant, stalwart, architect, teacher. Behind the official phrases, there are private shocks. Men and women who had come to think of him as a permanent fixture in the moral landscape of the country suddenly realize that no one, not even the most stubborn, defies time forever. At his funeral, the contradictions of his life gather under one sky. There are ANC leaders in dark suits, faces solemn. There are communists, old comrades in red shirts, fading with age. There are family members, some in simple clothes, some in styles that speak of a new middle class. There are old Robben Island prisoners, walking slowly, leaning on sticks, eyes filled with memories too heavy for words. There are young activists born after his arrest, who know apartheid only from stories and museum exhibits. They sing the hymns of the struggle, the same songs that once echoed off prison walls. They speak of his discipline, his toughness, his insistence on principle. They recall his sharp questions, his refusal to be satisfied with easy slogans, his capacity to hold both warmth and steel in the same glance. They talk about his role in nurturing leaders, including the one now standing before them as president. Somewhere in a small house, far from the cameras, the retired security officer hears the coverage on his television. He sits alone, the volume turned up too high for the size of the room. On the screen, he sees Govan's coffin, draped in the colors of a flag that did not exist when he first opened a file on Mbeki G. He hears commentators speak of a founding father of democracy, of a man who helped break the back of apartheid. He feels something twist in his chest that is not just the ache of old age. For years, he believed he was the hunter and Govan the quarry. Now, watching a nation mourn a man he tried to erase, he understands something else. History itself chose its champion, and it was not him. The rivalry is over. The verdict has been delivered in the streets, in the schools, in the very existence of a parliament where people of all races argue. Under a constitution, Govan helped inspire. In the years after his death, his presence lingers in more than statues and street names. It lives in the way activists talk about land reform, invoking his early writings on peasants and rural struggle. It lives in the internal debates of the ANC and other movements, where his insistence on internal democracy and accountability surfaces whenever leaders stray too far from their bases. It lives in universities, where his books are studied, not as relics, but as tools to understand new forms of inequality. It lives, too, in the life of his son, who carries both the burden and the honor of being Mbeki in a world that now expects answers from those in power, not just resistance to those who hold it. Most of all, it lives in an unbroken line of stubbornness. A child in a village questions why their school has no books when the city schools do. A young worker asks why, in a free country, they still cannot feed their family. A student in a lecture hall raises a hand to challenge a professor's easy assumption about history. Each time, whether they know his name or not, they are echoing the same refusal that led a man to turn down conditional freedom, to endure decades in prison, rather than make his enemies' lies his own. Govan Mbeki did not outlive his rival in a literal sense. Apartheid collapsed while he was still alive, yes, but the deeper enemies he spent his life confronting, greed, exploitation, indifference, are still out there, shape-shifting, finding new forms. He knew they would be. He knew the race would continue beyond his last breath. What he did, in the end, was something more dangerous than defeat a system. He helped leave behind a generation trained not to believe that any system is permanent. A generation that looks at power, whether it wears a uniform, a suit, or a liberation badge, and remembers an old man with failing eyes and an unbroken voice asking, again and again, the same hard questions. Who owns the land? Who owns the labor? Who owns the future? The clock on his wall stopped on one August day in 2001, but the ticking he set in motion, the urgent beat that says, change is possible, but only if you fight for it, continues. In arguments, in marches, in quiet acts of defiance, in the restless gaze of those who refuse to be soothed by comfortable lies. In that sense, the race he ran with his enemy never truly ended. He simply crossed his line, passed the baton, and left the rival to face what he could never arrest, never ban, never imprison. People who have learned from lives like his that even a life sentence on an island can be turned into a weapon, and that time, so long as someone is willing to keep counting, can still be made to serve freedom.